Welcome to Change the Narrative. I'm your host, JD Fuller.
I'm Susie Younger,
an African-American licensed psychotherapist.
I'm also a licensed therapist.
We talk about the isms. We talk about the phobias, anything that marginalizes and oppresses.
As a white woman, I ask the questions white people are too afraid to ask.
Everything we are not and everything we are is because of fear. Through a mental health lens, Susie and I will have difficult conversations with celebrity guests, political activists, and everyone in between. Our mind will tell us whatever we want to believe, but the truth lives in the body, and that's where change occurs. Are you ready to change the narrative? I'm JD Fuller, licensed clinical social worker, and this is my co-host, Susie Unger, LMFT. And we are super excited to invite Brian S. Bentley into the show with us today. Brian is a former LAPD officer and author of One Time, the story of a South Los Angeles police officer, and Honor Without Integrity. It's a mouthful. Welcome, Brian. So happy to have you.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
So we're going to get right into it because there's a lot to talk about. As Susie said, we kind of did a search yesterday and found all things Brian. Super interesting. We saw some interviews you were on, and you're awesome, Brian. I have to say, I have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you.
So the first thing we wanted to do, we just kind of wanted to go back a little bit and figure out who Brian was. Who were you growing up, and when did you know you wanted to be a police officer?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, and a native Los Angeles. Most of my family is here. And I started off working. I went to college, went to Cal State LA, graduated from Cal State LA, wanted to be a businessman. I worked at Security Pacific Bank. I don't know if you guys, are that old, but yeah. I was an assistant manager at Security Pacific Bank. And I wanted to work in my community. My parents always instilled that, we work in the community and help the community. So I worked at the Security Pacific Bank on 29th and Crenshaw. Okay. That bank was always getting robbed. People were getting robbed in the parking lot, and I had the opportunity to talk to police officers, and a lot of them encouraged me to go into law enforcement. But I didn't do it immediately. And for those who are familiar with banking, about that time, that was about 1988. Banking went through this deregulation, and they were bringing banks over from the East Coast to the West Coast, and they were laying off managers. So I started looking for another job, and I went down to the city hall, and I applied for a bunch of jobs, and I saw this poster of this black police officer in a suit and tie with a badge on, and I said, hey, let me just try that. That seems pretty cool. And I've heard so much about LAPD, and I went ahead and applied, and just one thing led to another, and I became a police officer.
And so what was your goal? When you said, I get the motivation, it was, you saw these robberies happening, you wanted to work in your community, and then, so what was your goal in going in? Did you have a set goal in mind?
I did have a set goal, and it's, I'm glad you brought that up, because what was ironic is that my goal going in was to try to bridge the gap between the community. I know police were needed. I wanted to be one of the good police officers. And, I have family members who have been arrested, family members who were gang members, and they always, have these horror stories about LAPD. And I was never really involved with any interaction with LAPD. So I thought they were good and wholesome, but I wanted to kind of bridge that gap. Okay. And LAPD at the time was going through this whole campaign where they were trying to be this kinder, gentler police department, and the academy was supposed to be like a college environment. It was supposed to be different, and they advertised that they wanted blacks, they wanted minorities, and so forth. So I wanted to be a part of that new plan. That was, that's why I went in there.
It totally makes sense. You're connecting the dots for us. And so you get in and you take on this responsibility. You're working in the community originally, right?
Well, man, let's go back, because let me tell you, my first day in the academy, I'm, just excited to be there, start my new career. And my drill instructor looks at me and says, you know what, we don't need people like you on the police department. We have enough people like you in Nickerson Gardens. We don't need you here in the academy. And for those who don't know, Nickerson Gardens is a project in Watts. So, you know, right then it showed me how they saw me, you know, their view of me, just their perception just by looking at me.
Right.
And a red flag came on right then. So, you know, I was like, okay, well, was this the right thing, you know? So after I graduated from the academy, you have choices of where you want to go. And I chose to work in the division where I grew up in and where I lived in that Southwest division. But I was transferred to West LA division, which is Brentwood, Bel Air, Palisades, you know, where the rich, you know. So I did a year there, and it was a very tough year, very tough probationary period. My first training officer told me, he said, the first day that I was out in the field, he said, I'm not here to train you. I'm here to fire you, because I think that all blacks and minorities, women, are only on the job just because of affirmative action. You guys don't belong here. And my job is not to train you, it's to fire you.
Welcome.
How did you keep going? Because it sounds like it was hit after hit after hit. How did you keep going, and what was the final mental health trigger that was the moment when you decided you had to write this book?
Well, you're absolutely right. It was one hit after another. But the way they treat you in the academy is that they put you through so much that you can't quit. You know, you go through so much and you can't say, I can't stop now. They want me to quit. I can't quit. Even though I wanted to quit, you know, I really wanted to. But yeah, I went through so much, and I know they didn't want me there, so I just couldn't do it. And I kept thinking that it would get better and get better, you know, as it went along. And actually, at some point, it got better when I got off of my rookie year. You know, LAPD is kind of like high school when you're a freshman. They bully the new people, the rookies. They bully because they don't have a voice. And you have to do what they tell you to do, and you have to get along just so you can make it on the department. So it's kind of like that. So once I got past that, I was okay with it, but it changed me for the worse. I was very short-tempered, very angry. I was angry at the department for what I went through, and as a result, I was angry at citizens. I was just mad. I don't even know why.
So wait, I want to pause you there, because I really want to do a timeline. So you're in there about how long when you started to really feel that short fuse and that anger start to come up?
Wow, that you know, probably 6 months or so.
Wow.
Out on the street. But then that was towards the people that I worked with. Because what's ironic is that you hear people talk about the blue and how we're all family. Well, you know, that's not the case. You know, I hated a lot of the officers that I worked with. I hated all my training officers. But that was when I was a rookie. Now, when I transferred over after that. I transferred to Southwest Division, which was in the Black community. A lot of crime, very violent crimes, gang members. And then it became, you know, kind of socially acceptable to be angry towards the people in the community because they expected it. They gave it to us, and we gave it back. And it was like a comfort level. You know, I was at home. You know, I was mad. I had issues, and I went and looked for other people who had issues. And, you know, we jailed.
Yeah. So tell me, you have issues. I really appreciate you saying that. And we're going to describe issues as mental health challenges. Were you feeling depressed? Were you feeling constantly agitated? Like, what were the symptoms when you say issues?
Well, you know, I don't know the clinical issues.
Yeah.
And
just tell us what you were feeling.
Well, you know, I don't think I was depressed. You know, it's kind of hard to tell if you're depressed, right?
Right, it's true.
But I know I had anger issues. Very short-tempered. I was short-tempered. And see, and this is the ironic part about it is that one day I was in roll call, and some officers were they were talking about some things in roll call. I don't specifically remember what it was, but I got upset, and I told the officers that you know, that that they didn't know what they were doing, and I got upset and I yelled at them and I cursed them and I challenged the sergeant and everything. And then once I was done, I was thinking, this was it. And I'm challenging everybody. And then when it was over, the sergeant came to me, the one that I had cursed out, and said, I thought you were soft, but dang, you know what? I think I like you.
So that's rewarded. That's rewarded.
Yeah.
And then other officers were like, hey, let's work together, and so it's like once they saw that I had snapped and that was, a different personality that I had, I was loved.
Yeah. Wow.
For
That's
the wrong
powerful.
reasons,
Yeah.
That's powerful. So tell us about the moment or the incident that was the final trigger for you when you said, I got to get this out of my body. I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And it culminated in your book.
Well, it was a number of things. I had seen police beatings. People we saw during the Rodney King beating. That Rodney King beating was pretty horrific. But once I transferred over to Southwest Division, the Rodney King beating on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being worst, was probably about a 5 or 6.
Oh my God.
It was like love taps, compared to the things that I saw as a police officer and working in, the minority community. So I saw these things and I wanted to express these things, and I was doing it gradually. I had contacted the LA Times because I wanted to kind of write a story to let people see what law enforcement was really about. They didn't like my view. They thought my view was distorted. I had an interview with Washington Post. They came out here. They interviewed me for like 2 hours. They did an article, and it was like a half a paragraph that I was mentioned in it. And so, I realized that the media doesn't want to hear it. So I decided to write a book. And if people were interested in it, it was supposed to be a book of reference,
Yeah.
If people were interested, they buy it. If not, no big deal. I went through, tried to get a major publisher. At the time, I was labeled as a police conspiracy theorist.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and I published the book myself, and it was just supposed to be just this reference, no big deal type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start seeing all this stuff in the media, and all the things that I wrote about, all suddenly became true and became factual, and I became an expert based on things that I wrote, just in passing.
And so what happened? What was the timeline to when you finally left the department, and why?
Well, I guess I didn't really answer your question either. But what happened was I had wrote this book, and I was going to probably publish it when I retired because I knew that I would get some flack from it. But there was a police officer. His name was Kevin Gaines. He was all in the media. He got killed by another police officer that was a detective who was undercover, and he was on duty. I mean, he was off duty. Detective was on duty, and he got murdered by the detective. And then a number of other things happened, but that was like the final straw that, hey, you know what? I may not make it. I may not make it till I retire. I need to do this now. And so I wrote the book while I was on the job, which was, I wouldn't advise anybody to do, but I wrote it while I was still a police officer because I didn't know if I was ever going to, make it to retire. So I decided to do that. That was a deciding incident that made me go ahead and publish this book because I was shopping it around still in hopes of having a big publisher, but I decided that I needed to do it because this information needed to be there in case I wasn't there.
And so I can't get past the Kevin Gaines, to be honest with you. I'm like feeling that deeply. I'm so sorry. That had to be horrific. And was the book the reason they fired you?
The book was the main reason that they fired me.
That was it.
It's, I didn't have any problems before that. What happened was when I wrote the book, I had an interview, internal affairs interview that was 2 days. It lasted a total of 14 hours. They went over every line in the book, like a book report, every single line. And what they did, they got me for allegations of, this is what's crazy about it. They got me for allegations for not reporting misconduct when I was on the job. For instance, I wrote about my training officer that I told you about.
Yeah.
One day when I was in the car, he says that, because he was very negative towards blacks and towards women, especially women. But he said, you know what? He says, the only reason that we have women on this job is so they can give you oral sex in between calls. That's the
Yeah.
only reason. So I wrote that in my book.
Oh, I love it.
So that became an allegation of misconduct because I didn't report it, that he said that
Wow.
7 years ago. So so it turns out I had like 300 allegations of misconduct, and they were all from my book. And it was because I didn't report things at that time, even though I tried to report some stuff.
I got to tell you, when I was when Susie and I were watching an interview with Fox News and on Hidden Truth, I was so frustrated. I was so frustrated that they tried to make it sound like it was just you and you were a lone wolf seeing this. I was just I was angry. They minimized racism. They acted as if racism wasn't a thing when we know it is a big thing. Speak to the racism you experienced and witnessed in the police department.
Well, I often talk about this. I mentioned my first training officer, and my first training officer, he was white, and he told me that his job was not to train me; it was to get me fired.
Right.
And so I wrote about this in my book a lot about my first training officer and the things he would say about blacks and just about minority. And we often talk about racism, but the department really doesn't like women. Women is sexism is really bad on the police department. It's not talked about much, but those are the things that you experience when you hear your training officer talk about things like that. There's different comments all the time in roll call. They would make comments about blacks and stuff. And as a black police officer, you can't go anywhere and make a formal complaint, that you have to handle things yourself. So that was one of the things that made me angry as a police officer too, is that I was always had to stand up for, for the underdog, for women, for blacks. They would make these comments, and I would have to always step in and say, hey, that's wrong. What you guys are saying is wrong. And there was just a lot of comments.
And then the thing is that you said something about how you were surprised, or I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it was something to the effect that it was always surprising when black officers acted the same way that the white officers did, in this kind of racist way. And I feel like that has something to do with their own self-hatred. Like, they're dying to fit in. And so they have to become a part of the oppressive system to show that they're trying to be one of them. Do you think that makes sense?
It makes sense. And, I've often thought about that. And when I wrote my book, I didn't want to address it in in that light of racism, because for every time you hear one black person says that there's racism on the job, you'll come back and you'll hear a black person say it's the best job they ever had, and they're all their friends, and we're a family. So when I wrote my book, I wrote it from a cultural standpoint, which cannot be disputed. Right. And that is that there's a culture of violence, and it's accepted and it's loved, and so that whole culture of being rude, and it's just it's kind of like a culture that police officers have. They're very negative, they're very rude, racist comments and stuff, very violent, quick-tempered. So that's what I try to address in my book, because I thought that would be something that would be long-standing and couldn't be disputed,
Totally makes sense. Susie, you want to jump on?
Wow, I'm just so taking in your story.
Too.
I'm sorry I got lost in it. And I'm really thinking about your book being your truth, and that your truth, which was based in fact, was completely invisibilized, and that you became victimized by your own truth. Why do you think, having been in the force and now being outside of it and watching everything that's going on, why do you think that police, and we've all seen it, that police officers still today feel like they can get away with the police brutality or with brutality and murder?
Well, police officers don't, they don't feel like they can get away with police brutality and murder. They know they can, right? And they know they can. They know if they say the right things during their arrest, write the right things on their arrest report, say that they're in fear for their life, fear, they know they can get away with it. Absolutely, they know they can get away with it. There's no doubt in their mind. There's no question. One of the things that we went through in roll call was we went over ways to circumvent people's civil rights.
Wow.
People think that police officers are just ignorant, high school dropouts and stuff, but they are experts in circumventing your civil rights. They practice it, they rehearse it. It's a recipe. Wow. It's a secret recipe that's been passed down, for generations, like the Colonel's chicken. It's just a secret recipe that's good every time. And we had our watch commander would have a big clipboard with police reports on it, very generic police reports. Male, black, between 5'5", 6'3", white t-shirt, medium build, bald head, whatever description you want to find. And we use those for probable cause or reasonable suspicion to stop.
Wow.
So if I stopped you and I said, you fit a description, in your mind, you're like, I don't fit no description. But I'm telling you, by the time you get to the station, you will fit a description.
Wow.
There's a description for you somewhere in there. So it's something that's, it's something that has been in the works for generations. It's not just by chance, and police officers know that. And one of the things another component that I talk about a lot is that, I'm not a psychologist or anything like you guys. I've taken a couple psychology classes. I used to work for D.D. Hirsch. Yeah, after I left, because my first major, which was ironic, I don't want to get off the subject, but my first major in college was psychology.
Okay.
I had a
it
group,
shows up in your work.
So check this out. So I had a group dynamic discussion, a class, and we talked and everything. And so my professor told me I had a problem empathizing with people.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a real problem.
Yeah, well, it was perfect for LAPD.
Yes.
It was a perfect segue for LAPD.
Exactly.
So
that's really interesting, Brian.
So one of the things is that when I wrote it, I kind of referred back to my psychology days, So what the things that I found is that, speaking for myself mainly, is that violence was addicting. It was like having.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you about, because you say over and over again that cops are addicted to violence.
They are. It's adrenaline rush. When you are chasing somebody and you get to the end of a pursuit and you have a fight, you beat them down. It's like it's a rush that goes through you. And some police officers look for that every night. And like I said, I knew where to go to satisfy that, because you have individuals, you have great gang members, which is another issue. They have all kind of problems too. And it's ironic. When I worked at D.D. Hirsch, I worked at a residential crisis facility, and in that facility were teachers, gang members, and police officers. And I was like, whoa, this is like,
not a good combination.
That's deep, And so we know gang members had issues, cops have issues, and if you want to be violent, you go find those people who want to be violent with you. Wow. And what we're seeing now is that cops are just so addicted to it, and they have issues that they can't control it. You have body cams, you have cameras, surveillance cameras on buildings. Everybody has a cell phone that videos, and police officers can't control it. They can't stop it.
Yeah.
They're still violent. They still use excessive force in front of everybody because they can't control it. And those are the people who are like really sick.
Yeah.
There's a lot of officers that work at night on the graveyard shift that you'll never see what happens. And gang members get beat up all the time. And people who are who are considered less desirable, they get beat up all the time too. Like George Floyd, that happened to take place in the daytime, but they didn't feel anything for him. And other officers that I know don't feel sorry for him either. That's a part of society that it's acceptable to be brutal too.
So JD and I have talked about this a lot. There are a lot of veterans and extremists that join the force. Do you think that that's a catalyst for some of the addiction?
I do. I mean, I do. That hiring pool that they hire from, they love veterans. One of the reasons they love veterans is because they don't question authority. They already know how to just follow commands.
Oh, wow. I never thought of it like that. Okay.
In fact, my training officer and my captain that I talked to said that they didn't like people who went to college first, who had college degrees first, because they always question authority and they're always trying to come up with some kind of philosophical discussion about, what's going on instead of just following orders. And they love military people because they follow orders, whether they're right or wrong. They follow the chain of command and they stick to the chain of command. And then a lot of them have PTSD before they come on the job.
Yeah.
So it's like they're ticking time bombs,
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, that just is hitting me. In your book, or maybe one of the interviews, you said that you knew of at least 7 police officers who went to prison.
Right. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that you were part of the collusion since you were there and witnessed significant corruption under your watch?
No.
What do you say to people who say that to you?
Well, the thing is, I had mentioned before that I had went to some of my supervisors to make complaints about officers. But the thing is, the sergeants and stuff, they go camping and hiking with the patrol officers, and so they're friends, and they're not going to take a complaint. And this is the way LAPD works. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Christopher Dorner. Christopher Dorner was a police officer years ago who went on this killing rampage.
Yep.
And he talked about how the LAPD tries to ruin your life if you're a whistleblower. Well, this is the way that the LAPD works, how law enforcement in general works. It's not like corporate America, where in corporate America, if I come and say that you sexually harassed me or you did something wrong, there would be an investigation. And if it wasn't proven, then they would maybe move you or do something like that.
Okay.
Law enforcement doesn't work like that. If I make a complaint against you and I can't prove it, or they can't prove it, you get fired. You get fired for giving false information to a supervisor. And you can get indicted because you're lying during an official investigation. So it's not in your best interest unless you just have like absolute fact and some witnesses, even still then, because, and as I referenced Christopher Dorner, because he complained that his training officer used excessive force. The person who was the victim complained. That person had a father that complained and another neighbor that was a witness that also complained, and they still found that officer innocent and fired Christopher Dorner. So,
it sounds like LAPD breeds criminals, and the addiction feeds police brutality. And wow, I'm just wondering emotionally how you dealt with cover-ups and being part of it, what that must have felt like every day.
Well, police officers suppress their emotions and their morals. One thing about a police officer is that you learn that when you're on the job, you don't represent your own self. You do a lot of things that aren't part of your character and aren't a part of your views. You just do your job. You don't put anything personal on it. So police officers really don't have a lot of emotions. At least they suppress that, you know. And so I didn't feel anything when I was on the police department. I was numb. I didn't feel anything. And I had wrote in my book too about the nightmares that I had. Man, I had some nightmares when I was a police officer, because like everything that I suppressed and, that I hid usually came out, when I was asleep,
Mhm.
in my dreams.
Right.
But, externally, police officers don't have, I don't know if you know any, but they just turn off all those emotions. It's a job that's not meant for, for humans. You go to a scene and there's some kid lying there dead, been shot in the face or whatever. A normal person would feel sorry for that person, would, grieve, feel sad. Police officers is just part of the job. They go to work, start interviewing people, cordon off the scene. It's just duty. It's just one detail after another, and you don't feel anything. You don't feel anything about anything.
Wow.
And yet you do, because the response is not you personally, but the response is the anger, the violence, the addiction to the violence. It
Right.
shows up somewhere. It's got to go somewhere.
It does. And I had a partner who told me that he couldn't go to sleep unless he had 2 6-packs of beer, when he came home. Now, a lot of police officers are alcoholics. And I assume, there are some that are probably addicted to other drugs too as well, but they don't test for them. But police officers are screwed up. I mean, really, the high rate of suicide, divorce, all their kids are bad, don't like them, so a lot of them have some messed up lives.
Yeah.
And the ones that you see who are like great husbands and great fathers, it's usually after like two tries or 3 tries.
Yeah, I've noticed that, or on TV shows.
Right.
Right.
So it's a tough job psychologically.
Yes.
There's a lot of factors in there, and police brutality is just one of them. I won't say it's just a small part of it, but it's just a part of that whole breakdown, that whole just trying to cope. You'll see police officers that work out all the time. They do a lot of excessive stuff, buy a lot of jet skis, a lot of stuff, and they don't even really see it. A lot of stuff to compensate for what they're hiding, the emotion and the pain that they're hiding.
Do you personally, Brian, wish or think that more police officers should come out and speak against the department and what they see?
That's a great question. Because I'm, kind of torn on that.
Yeah, it makes sense.
A lot of police officers need jobs. They need to pay their rent. They need to support their family and their, live stress-free, as much stress-free as possible. If you come out and speak against the police department, because you're either for them or against them, you can't, like in my book, I have some great things that I say about police officers. And then, I talk about some of my partners that were really just great people. And then I talk about some negative stuff. But if you say one negative thing, then you're negative and you're against the police department. And the department will go and pull out all stops to get rid of you and to make your career horrible. And one thing about law enforcement is that there's so many things that go on each day that you will make a mistake. And so you need somebody by you to stand by you and to speak for you and be on your side to vouch for you. And if you don't have that, then it makes your job really that much difficult, because, you're going to make mistakes. And so so to answer your question, no, I would not recommend someone to come out and speak against the police department.
I just watched a whole documentary on a cult that wasn't named a cult. It was named something else. But this feels very much like a cult. And if you think differently or anything and you go away, then you are now the target. They will come after you.
But, that's interesting that you mentioned it as a cult, because after I was terminated from the police department, I lost all my friends that were police. Well, most of them that were, police officers. I used to go to police parties, police barbecues, police picnics. Everything was police, and it was gone, and my whole social network was gone. And one thing I remember in the academy was they continued to tell you that LAPD is your family, law enforcement is your family, and you need to exclude and get rid of all those people who aren't part of your family. If you have anybody who's been arrested or family members don't understand you, which is true, and you need to disassociate yourself with all that and embrace your LAPD family. And, that kind of sounds like a cult. And when I left LAPD in the circumstances I left, I didn't have any of that. And I quickly realized, all that is gone. And I think that's why I've had a lot of partners who were fired from LAPD that committed suicide. And I think it's because all their, their whole social network and everything was gone.
You just segued nicely into the next part, which was, and you already mentioned Christopher Donner. I just felt his story. It was criminal what happened to him. And all you hear about is, not all cops are bad. And here's a guy who tried to do the right thing. And until he lost it and went on a rampage, he was left to look like the worst person in the world. And I felt like that was horrible. And you mentioned something else that happens, which is police suicide, which is at such a high level right now. It's like Christopher Donner went the suicide by murder route, and other police officers are killing themselves. What's your response to that? Because given what you're saying, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, my purpose in writing my book and talking about LAPD was to make improvements, to improve the relationship with the community and to have police officers try to exercise their demon and become better people. And I thought that me coming out and talking about everything would give people the courage and kind of light a fire so that they would do some things to change themselves, their family, change the job. I wanted to make a difference. So I tried to hit different subjects and different topics so that maybe I can touch people in different ways. And so that was my purpose. And, I had wished that maybe Christopher Dorner had read my book and maybe that he could have did some reflecting before he went on this rampage and realized that, what was being done to him by the department and what the effects were and what the goal was. The end goal is just to protect the police department. They want to protect just the image that they think they have or that they want to present, just being this wholesome department, no problems or whatever. And then, they just want to protect that image, and they'll do whatever they can. They'll go after you and they'll do whatever they can. And one of the things that I talk about is that when you make a complaint against the police department, and this is police officers or just a civilian, the first thing they do is they attack the person who's making the complaint. They go after you, run your rap sheet, run your parking ticket, so they can come up with an excuse saying, oh, she made a complaint because she got a parking ticket last week. That's why she made this complaint against the police department. Or this officer made a complaint against another officer because last week he came in late or whatever, so that's the tactic that they use, and they do go after you. It's not something that is speculated. It's the truth, and we see it.
There's a lot of officers getting fired lately for speaking up. Have you reached out to any of them, made contact with any of them as just kind of like networking?
I have. I have. In fact, I have a little podcast that I do. My intentions were to interview officers who went through the same experience as I did. And I made contact with a lot of officers who've written books, who were fired and so forth, but they don't want to talk about it. They still do not want to talk about it. And I learned that, which I wasn't really aware of at the time, but a lot of officers have family members who are on the department. They may have a son or a daughter in the department. They may have a father-in-law that's on the department, a wife, some kind of connection, and they don't want to jeopardize that. They don't want to.
They're scared.
They're afraid. They are afraid. They don't want to get their sibling or whoever's attached to the police department, to get them in trouble. And I had an officer tell me he had won a major lawsuit with the police department, and he just straight out told me that, hey, my child is on the department, and I don't want any retaliation.
And so there is a reason to be afraid.
Yeah.
Oh, there's definitely a reason to be afraid. And police officers don't just try to fire you. They try to ruin your life. They try to put you in jail. They try to find a reason to say that you committed a crime so you can go to prison and ruin your life. It's not just, firing is not just good enough for them.
You know, there's this police officer on social media, and he says, you know, he worked in some of the most crime-ridden areas as a police, and he said he thinks the problem today is that the culture is to militarize the department. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about.
I do. I believe that to a certain extent. I mean, there are certain situations where you do have violent criminals that, you have to be just as violent, of course. But, a lot of stuff that we see, that we're seeing now with social media and with video cameras and stuff, they're just average people that are getting.
That's the problem. And the shooters in the back. We're not talking about somebody who has a gun, but then you see them arrest white people and they have guns and are cursing them out, swinging at them, and the same thing doesn't happen. That's the problem.
You're right. That is the problem. And, so now we're seeing people who are just everyday average people that are getting murdered and beaten up. And in that aspect, you have to, there has to be change. People are talking about defunding the police. There has to be a change because
one of the things that strikes me is that they always, in one of your interviews, they talked about, the most crime-ridden areas, and they always referred to Black and Latino communities as, being the most crime-ridden, but they never talk about the level of poverty, the lack of access. The lack of access and poverty breeds crime. We don't look at how systems have failed people who are poor, and crime comes out of that. I think it's something that's missed. What do you think about that?
Well, it is missed, and I think it's a fact that law enforcement is not what suppresses crime or stops crime. It's other activities, there's other things, other components in the community. People being involved, coaching, sports, things that keep people active, jobs. It's not, law enforcement is not going to do it.
Right.
It is not going to do it, and it's a fact. I started working in LAPD in '89, which at that time LAPD, the city of LA was the murder capital of the world. Mm-hmm. What we see now, we hear stories about what's taking place in Chicago, but LAPD was twice as worse as Chicago is now. The homicide rate was twice as high. And, we had, at the time it was Daryl Gates. We had different things like Operation Hammer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, where they brought all the officers from everywhere and put them in South LA, and they arrested people for spitting on the sidewalk, wrote tickets, for all kind of stuff, and it didn't help. It just is really, it wasn't the solution. And Daryl Gates was big on that whole militarizing the police, and those things did not help. And it was the social programs that helped, and the job marketing increased and so forth. But LAPD, all they can do is kind of hold serve. Law enforcement, all they can do is hold serve. To actually win the point, there's other things that have to be done.
I'm going to throw it to Susie because she's going to do a word association with you. But I wanted to ask you one thing. How did you deal with your mental health? How did you get to be this stable, grounded guy now who's an advocate and doesn't seem to be afraid of repercussions for telling your truth? How did you get here?
Well, that's interesting because I never really thought about it, but it was a very difficult time. Yeah. I tell you, when I got fired, the first thing I did was I took my gun loose, took it all apart, and put it in a drawer and different pieces, because I had a partner that I worked with, was a female officer. She was fired and she committed suicide. I had another friend of mine that went into the parking lot of his job, and he wasn't fired. We had a bad relationship, and he committed suicide. So I didn't want to see my guns. I took all my guns, took them away. I didn't want to see them. That wasn't going to be me. And what really worked for me was that when I became a police officer, I had work experience. So I had experience working in a bank as a manager. I had a sales experience. I had experience working because I volunteered at D.D. Hirsch all the time. And I worked there while I was still a police officer. So I had a lot of things to draw on. So LAPD was not my life. LAPD was never my life. It was, it was very important to me, but I had other things. My mother kept me grounded. My mother, her uncle back in the day got beat up by police officers, and his name was Uncle Bubba. And the police officer stopped him. He was drinking one night. They took his money and beat him up. So she's always called me every morning before I went to work and say, hey, be a good cop. Don't be one of them bad cops that beat up your Uncle Bubba.
Oh, that's great.
So my mother always kept me grounded. My mother didn't want me to be a police officer, but she was very supportive. And she always, tried to keep me grounded and tell me to be a good cop. And what's funny is that when I told her I had been fired, she said, well, I never wanted you to be a police officer anyway, but I didn't want your ass to get fired either. So, that she said that wasn't the point. That wasn't, her goal.
That's great.
But, she was very supportive of me. My church, I leaned on my church. I always, even when I went to, when I was a police officer, I always attended church. And I wrote in my book that even though I was still grounded spiritually and went to church and sung in the choir, I would go to church and I have like 3 guns on me, at church, because I didn't feel comfortable, didn't feel safe. So, part of that whole mental health thing. And then I talked about how, even when I was at home, when I went to the restroom, I took my gun with me to the restroom.
Wow.
So giving up my gun was a big thing. That was a big thing.
That was the evidence.
Yeah, that was a big thing in my life. Just put my gun away, and I started to lean more towards the people who, I really didn't have a choice, but to go back to my old friends that weren't in law enforcement.
Oh, good for you.
Just go back to that whole social network. And
good for you.
So that's what kept me grounded. Christopher Dorner talked about he lost everything. LAPD wasn't everything to me.
That's heartbreaking.
Wow.
Take it away, Susie.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to ask you to just tell us what comes up for you when I throw out these words. Okay?
Okay, I want to say one thing too, though, which is kind of interesting, is that as a police officer, as a former police officer, my psyche goes back and forth. I may give something that associates with me now.
Yeah.
Something that associates
whatever
with me
comes up.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Whatever comes up.
Yeah, there's no rules.
Okay.
Okay, privilege.
Law enforcement, police officers have, just one word, law enforcement, police officers. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Breonna Taylor.
Criminal. In the sense, can I clarify?
Sure.
Yeah, go
for
it.
In criminal means the police officers that committed the murder, committed a crime. I've been in shootings, and just because someone fires a shot at an officer or fires a shot at you does not give you the green light to just randomly shoot anyone in the area.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Memory.
Repeat that. What was it?
Memory.
Memory. Selective memory.
Change.
Impossible.
Oh, wow.
Say more about that.
Yeah, please.
I just think that, we're talking about police brutality right now. We're talking about murders. I don't think it will change. I don't think it I don't think there's enough people in power that want it changed. I know police officers don't want change. I often write about the riots when I was in the riots. Um, police officers don't care about riots. Riots are good for them. They like riots.
It's like going to war.
It's like going to war. They have stories to tell their kids, their grandkids. They when I was a police officer during the riots in 1992, I made so much money. I paid off my car. I bought a 12-person jacuzzi. I bought a big screen TV, and that was all from my riot check. And my partner.
But wait, I don't understand. I don't understand that.
Well, because you work overtime.
Overtime.
Because you have riots, you have protests. These police officers, when you see Black Lives Matter protests, you're seeing these officers, they're making overtime. These officers who are standing by.
We're paying them.
And they're getting paid. They're getting paid overtime, extra hours. And like during the riots, I worked about like 18 hours a day. And during the riots and then afterwards, just for protection. But they work a lot of hours and they love working these hours because they're getting paid for it. They're getting overtime for it, So
you mentioned Black Lives Matter. What do you think the movement has done to affect change?
Well, I think it's interesting because I see more police officers being indicted than I've ever seen in my life.
Okay.
But and I think a couple of them are going to prison. But we don't want that. We want police officers to stop killing people and to stop beating people. We don't just want to hold them accountable. We want them to stop. And that's where change comes in because I don't think it's going to stop. I don't think police officers can help it. In fact, I know they can't.
And so when people talk about defunding law enforcement, put the money somewhere else, social programs, the things that we know work. What do you think about that?
I think that's great. However, you can't, I don't think it's a good idea to have the city and law enforcement agencies control where that money goes. They make bad decisions. And that friends of city council members and politicians are going to all suddenly pop up with these nonprofit organizations and come up with fake solutions.
You are so right.
And we saw that once before when the Christopher Commission came up and had all these things. You had all these civil rights people come up with all these plans that they just came up real quick, and they're friends of politicians, friends of city councilmen, and they don't really have a plan. And so that part really worries me.
You're talking about a corruption that is so deep, it's closely connected to systemic racism and oppressive systems that just know how to get over. So it's very daunting. And I hear you when you say you don't think change can occur. It's scary and it's sad, but it's very true. And I appreciate your honesty. What's next for you? What are you doing these days?
Oh, I do so many things. I write. I'm still writing. I ghostwrite. I have a podcast. I coach track at a high school.
Oh, that's awesome.
My kids, one of my sons is in med school. Another one, my daughter's running track in college. So I go and see her track meets. And then my other son, he's an entrepreneur. So, I'm just busy.
Oh, you are busy.
That's awesome.
Brian, for people who want to tune in, what's the name of your podcast? Where can they find you?
You can go on YouTube and just search Brian S. Bentley. It's all under there. My books as well. You can find out about my books that I've wrote. I've written 3 books. One book that I don't talk about very often is called Hit Me Once, Hit Me Twice. And it's a book about domestic violence.
Ooh.
People would always ask me, what are the causes of gang members and crime and stuff like that? And I would say that one of the factors is, relationships. I see a lot of people who are hurt in relationships and they don't want to go back to that family because there's a lot of violence and stuff.
Yes.
That's why they're on the street. So I wrote a book to try to help young people about that. And it's called Hit Me Once, Hit Me Twice.
That's great. Wow, Brian, you are such an amazing person. Seriously, I mean that sincerely.
Did we finish the word association? I was like,
Yeah, you
we did
did it,
that.
Is
man.
that you like that?
You made it
Yeah.
happen.
I was like, man,
You made it happen. You made us think while you were associating. Brian, if you had the power to change anything in the world, you had the power to change anything in the world, what would it be?
Oh, just I want people to respect one another, no hate towards one another, love. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you.
Well, we're feeling nothing but love for you, man. You're awesome. Thank you so much for your
Well,
patience,
thanks
helping
for
us
having me.
organize and get on here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I waited a long time.
You sure did.
Here I am.
And you were
Thank you for waiting.
you were very patient. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to have you back again because I feel like we just scratched the surface. I think there's so much more we can talk about. I look
Yeah,
forward.
I do too. And, with you guys' background, I really would like to get into this whole, the psychological,
Yes.
effects of law enforcement and what these officers feel when they beat up people and,
Yes.
why they gravitate to it,
Yeah, that sounds awesome. We'll definitely have to do
Does.
that again. And thanks again for coming on.
Oh, thank you.